Good afternoon and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session Meeting. Please note that today's call is being recorded and currently all attendees are in a listen-only mode. There will be opportunity for public comment throughout today's call, and we will make sure to give you instructions on how to make a comment at that time. With that, I'll now turn the call over to Chair Joseph Edo.
Thank you, Silas. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to this special session of the ISO Board of Governors meeting. We have two really important, some of the most important things that we do with the ISO on our agenda today. The first is we'll talk about our 10-year transmission plan. This is where we make good on our commitments to work with the other agencies, the CEC and the PUC, to help meet our state's clean energy goals by planning the transmission system to onboard all that clean energy. The second and more near-term topic for today is really our summer report. And this is something I look forward to every year. I'm always very nervous until October runs around. And so I'm very eager to see what our staff are showing us in terms of what to expect for this coming summer. So with that, let me turn it to the corporate secretary for the roll call.
Thank you, Chair Edo. I will take a roll call in order as follows. Chair Edo.
Here.
Vice Chair Leslie. Vice Chair Leslie. Hey, you. Can you say present?
Mary is not hearing you, I think.
Leslie.
Okay.
Present.
I said that. Thank you. All right. Governor Bornstein.
Present.
Governor Reynolds.
Present.
And Governor Shorey.
Here.
All right. We have a quorum. As far as the public comment process for today, a reminder for folks on virtual, the way to do this, the way to get in line is to raise your hand in Zoom, and the operator will provide instructions when prompted at the appropriate time. Chair Edo, back to you.
All right, so at this point in our agenda, this is our public comment process for any items that are not otherwise on our agenda. So Silas, do we have any public comments?
If you would like to speak on public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon on Zoom, or if you're dialed into the phone only line, you can press #2. At this time, we do not have any hands up in the queue.
All right, thank you, Silas. Let's go to agenda item 2. This is a decision on our consent agenda. Back to you, Corporate Secretary.
Thanks, Chair Edo. All right, so the consent agenda has one item, which is the April 30, 2026 general session minutes. And at this time, I'm seeking a motion for the passage of this minutes.
So moved, Jam. Second.
Okay, and can I get a second for Leslie?
Yes.
And now we take a vote.
Aye.
Governor, Governor Bornstein. Sorry, Chair Edo.
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Aye.
Governor Reynolds.
Aye.
Governor Shorey.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes unanimously. Next.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, now this is our big agenda item. This is our decision on the 2025-26 transmission plan. I'd like to, I'm going to first, actually, Corporate Secretary, I think we have some public comment letters that need to be acknowledged first. So let me do that.
That's correct.
And then I'll introduce Neil.
Great, thanks, Joe. So we have received, and the board has been provided the following support letters. California Wind Energy Association, City and County of San Francisco, Grid Lab, Golden State Clean Energy, Independent Energy Producers Association, and Silicon Valley Power. Those have all been provided. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, let me introduce our Vice President of Transmission Planning and Infrastructure Development, Neil Miller, to provide an introduction for this presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Edo, and thank you everyone for participating in this special board meeting today. Today, I will be asking Jeff Billington, our Director of Transmission Infrastructure Planning, to present the 2025-2026 transmission plan for your approval. But before turning the microphone over to Jeff, I wanted to make a few comments. First, I want to thank Jeff and his team for the outstanding effort that went into the development of this year's transmission plan. While each year's transmission plan typically reflects a tremendous undertaking, this year's plan addressed a number of particularly thorny challenges with a daunting amount of analysis and effort going into it, and I really wanted to make a special point of acknowledging that. This year's plan continues to synchronize power, resource planning, transmission planning, interconnection, and procurement, developed in close collaboration with inputs from the California Energy Commission, the California Public Utilities Commission, other regulatory agencies, and our stakeholders. I also want to thank the CPUC, the Energy Commission, our transmission owners, and stakeholders for their efforts and support in getting us here today. I also wanted to highlight a few significant observations in this year's transmission plan, as Jeff will explain in more detail. This year's transmission plan continues the trend we noted in last year's transmission planning cycle, with reliability-driven projects driven by load growth, reflecting a larger and larger share of the recommended transmission, both by the number of projects and estimated cost. While data centers contribute materially to the load growth forecast, the load growth is also driven by other factors, including building and transportation electrification. The remainder of the transmission continues to be driven largely by the pace of resource development, as Jeff will discuss. The plan also reflects the ISO's commitment to seeking the most efficient and cost-effective solutions to meeting customer needs reliably. We are very sensitive to the affordability concerns and need to ensure that we are getting the most value from the transmission the system requires. I expect you will see those efforts reflected in a number of today's recommendations. I do note that we have received a number of letters about the transmission plan, largely supportive, but some also identifying particular concerns. I will address those after Jeff has completed his presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff now to present the 2025-26 transmission plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. It's Jeff Billington, as Neil indicated, and I'm going to present the decision item to you, Chair Edo and board members, on the ISO's 2025-2026 transmission plan. If we can go to the next slide, please. The primary drivers of the need for the recommendation for the approvals within this year's plan, as Neil indicated, are the increase in pace of the load growth, particularly in the Greater Bay Area, and the additional resources that are needed to serve the load and meet the state's policy goals that are identified in the California Public Utility Commission's resource portfolios. And as Neil indicated, the ISO is always focused on the costs, with the recommendations being based on long-term effective and efficient solutions. Next slide, please. The process, and again, Neil touched on this, is as we look at the 2025-2026 transmission plan, it continues to apply the focus on the zonal approach of the kind of resource development to address the rapidly accessing needs for those new resources and the load growth. And the memorandum of understanding that was established in 2022 kind of brings the items together, and so that the resource planning, the transmission planning are integrated, as well as it feeds into the interconnection processes and the procurement. And it tightens those linkages that are there, and it establishes the single forecast set that is used in resource planning and the transmission planning, so as to meet and to lead to the meeting of the needs for the state goals in a coordinated fashion. If you want to go to the next slide. As indicated, the CEC's load forecast which is utilized both by the California Public Utilities Commission in the development of the resource portfolios and in the transmission planning processes, are utilized. And as the two graphs here will indicate, they're utilized or in the 25-26 transmission planning process, we're utilizing the IPER, the CEC's 2024 IPER load forecast. And the graphs below illustrate, and the one on the left illustrates the California ISO's peak load demand. And as you can see with the top line, the increases in loads, which is the forecast has an increase of approximately 15 gigawatts by 2035 and 20 gigawatt by 2040 from the previous load forecasts or transmission plan forecast utilized load. And the graph on the right illustrates the significant growth that's forecasted in the Greater Bay Area. And it continues, if you look in terms of from the red line for last year's had an increase and a further increase in the forecast that's utilized within the 25-26 transmission plan. And that growth is associated with building and other electrifications, the data center growth, and transportation electrification. If you go to the next, yes, the CPUC's portfolios have also grown in response to the load growth that's occurring. And the base portfolio for this year's planning cycle includes about 75 or 74 gigawatt of new resources by 2035 and approximately 107 gigawatt by 2040. The resources identified within the portfolio that we are planning the transmission continue to maintain us on the trajectory to meet the reliability needs and the state's greenhouse gas goals as well. And in addition to the CPUC's portfolio, we do also coordinate with the local regulatory agencies as well as to non-jurisdictional requirements as well. In addition, as we're looking at the resource needs and the transmission to support those resource needs. If you want to go to the next slide. The 2025-2026 plan continues, as I indicated, to utilize the zonal approach to plan the transmission for the resources identified in the portfolios to enable clear direction and prioritization in resource interconnection and procurement processes. This diagram illustrates the interconnection zones within the capacity or with the capacity of the resources in the base and sensitivity portfolios for each of the zones that the ISO is planning the transmission system to reliably integrate the resources identified in the portfolios to be deliverable to the loads in the ISO grid. If you look at the next slide. This slide illustrates the study processes that are a part of the annual transmission planning process. The analysis of the transmission planning process is conducted in a sequential manner, starting with a reliability assessment to identify any reliability-driven project needs. Then the policy assessment to identify any policy-driven project needs, taking into consideration the reliability needs that have been identified. And then the economic assessment to identify any market efficiency needs, again, taking into consideration the policy and reliability needs. And this is done in a multi-value kind of approach. And so that's the three main as we look at identifying reliability-driven or policy-driven or economic-driven projects within the transmission planning process. In addition, we undertake every 2 years a 10-year local capacity study that was not undertaken in this planning cycle. It will be taken into in next year's planning cycle. And then the inter-regional transmission process is a 2-year process coordinated with the other planning regions, Northern Grid and WestConnect, for consideration of interregional transmission project proposals as potential solutions for regional needs. We are in year 2 of the process, and there were no projects identified in year 1 to be brought forward in this planning cycle to be assessed. Want to go to the next slide, please? The reliability assessment has identified 33 reliability projects driven by the load growth and the evolving grid conditions as the generation fleet transitions to increased renewable generation that are recommended for approval. The estimated cost of the 33 reliability-driven projects is $4.2 billion. Of the 33 projects, two of the projects were approved by the ISO management. 26 additional reliability projects are recommended for approval, and there are 5 previously approved projects with scope changes to address current needs that are recommended for approval. None of the reliability projects have been identified as eligible for competitive solicitation. Next slide, please. There are 4 previously approved projects that the reliability assessment identified that are recommended to be placed on hold for further review in next year's planning cycle. These are the Alamedas 230 kV short circuit duty upgrade project, the Lone Tree, Caetano, and Newark Corridor Series Compensation Project, the Coolwater 115 kV loop-in to Tortilla 115 kV substation, and the Julia Hines Mirage 230 kV line upgrade project. The reliability assessment also identified, and we're recommending 3 previously approved reliability projects to be canceled. These being the East Shore bus reconfiguration, the Metcalf 230 115 kV transformer circuit breaker addition, and the Moraga Sobrante 115 kV line reconductoring project. To meet the transmission needs to integrate the resources identified in the CPUC portfolio, an additional 4 policy-driven transmission projects are recommended for approval, these totaling $2.4 billion. One of the project is eligible for competitive solicitation, the Trout Canyon Lugo 500 kV line project. Next slide. And in this year's policy assessment, we identified 2 previously approved projects that are being recommended to be canceled, being the Serrano Delamo Mesa 500 kV transmission reinforcement project and the Helms 230 70 kV bank project. Next slide. And the economic studies investigating market efficient opportunities to reduce total cost to ratepayers through transmission upgrades not otherwise needed for reliability, accessing renewables and serving load were conducted in this year's planning cycle. As indicated earlier, as a part of the economic assessment, consideration of the recommended reliability and policy-driven needs and alternatives can be assessed in this process and have been. In the economic assessment, we did identify and we are recommending for approval 1 project totaling $150 million. And in this year's assessment also, we identified the need for upgrades on the path 115 or path 15 and path 2020 or 26 corridor, and that need was established in terms of within this planning cycle. But there is additional time that we're needing for detailed engineering analysis and bulk system assessment, and that will be undertaken in next year's planning cycle. If you go to the next slide, just to highlight as we look at what we identified and what the preferred alternative was from the economic assessment. To address the path 15 needs, a potential for a 115 kV line from the Whirlwind substation up to the Tesla substation, kind of between path 26, path 15, was the preferred alternative. But as I indicated, we have some additional bulk system studies that are required to look at, as well as the change to the congestion cost allocation as a part of the economic assessment, we'll undertake in next year's planning cycle to bring forward. And then in Path 26, we're going to continue some analysis and an investigation of some operational solutions, which look in terms of potentially of an addition of a RAS on the Path 26 to increase the capability. And this is to address as needing in terms of the congestion that has been identified and has been growing and has grown significantly really in the south from the southern area up to the northern area on these paths. So this will be in terms of work that will continue and we'll be bringing forward in next year's transmission planning process. Next slide, please. And then as I indicated, the interregional transmission process is a 2 years. We do coordinate with Northern Grid and WestConnect for consideration of the interregional transmission projects that are submitted to assess in terms of as solutions for regional needs. We're in year 2. We didn't receive any, or we didn't identify any interregional projects that have regional needs for ourselves. Neither did Northern Grid nor WestConnect in last year's planning cycle. So there was none brought forward for further assessment in year 2 in this year's planning cycle. And if you go to the next slide. We did receive a number of stakeholder comments. Majority of or a lot of the comments were in support of the reliability and policy economic assessments and recommendations within the transmission plan. We did, as Neil indicated up front, we did receive comments. There's a summary of comments in the board memo, as well as we did receive a number of letters. And following my presentation, Neil's going to walk through kind of the high level of the comments we received and responses to those at that time. Go to the next slide. And so in summary, there is a total of 38 projects for a total of $6.7 billion that were found to be needed in this year's planning cycle. And of those projects, one of the projects, the Trout Canyon Lugo 500 kV transmission line, is eligible for competitive procurement. And next slide. And so with this, the 25-26 transmission plan is recommended for approval. This plan continues to utilize the zonal approach for resource development as a foundation for interconnection process prioritization and for focus on procurement activities. It also continues to pursue low emission strategies in addressing reliability needs on the ISO controlled grid. It establishes a foundation for achieving higher renewable energy goals and provides for prudent, economic, efficient development of the transmission system. And this concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it back to Neil for discussion on the comments.
Thank you, Jeff. And if it's all right with the board, I'll walk through our responses to the letters so that you have the whole picture, and then we can move to questions. Thank you. Okay, so let me just kind of start at the top here, and I'll just walk through each of the letters we received and our particular response to them. I'll start with the Golden State Clean Energy letter first. To summarize, we did see the letter as largely supportive of the transmission plan that we're bringing in for approval. It did also highlight the potential for the Valley Clean Infrastructure Plan that's being developed by Golden State Clean Energy and Westlands Water District to play a role. And we will, in parallel with our own planning activities as we move forward, we will be continuing to support their efforts as they work to develop their project within the context of our tariff and their legal framework. So we do appreciate them providing those comments. Next, the City and County of San Francisco provided a letter discussing the potential benefits of the Warnerville-Newark line, what they referred to as the WANTEP project, which would be to upgrade that line to a higher capacity, higher voltage to provide benefits for both their system and for us. This line was proposed as an alternative to certain needs that Jeff and the team identified in the reliability analysis. And while it didn't meet those specific requirements, we do really agree with the strong value that that right-of-way provides for the opportunity for an enhanced project in the future. And we are, as we indicated in the transmission plan, we are really interested in working with the city and county to move forward on identifying the potential for a joint project that would provide benefits to both of us and make the best use of a truly valuable right-of-way. Next, we have received a letter from the Independent Energy Producers Association. Their letter expresses concern not with the actions in the transmission plan, but with the consequences and how we manage the transition, in particular around the cancellation of the Del Amo project that Jeff mentioned. I should mention up front that the other projects that Jeff also indicated that we were looking to have canceled through the approval of this year's plan were largely projects where a larger need had been identified, a larger project was moving forward, and it eliminated the need for the original smaller project. In the case of the Del Amo project, that project unfortunately is being canceled due to, as the more detailed engineering was developed, the scope grew drastically and also the cost to a level that we could not support. The need hasn't changed, however, so we have started moving on mitigations, and we do expect an additional mitigation to be required in next year's plan, but it isn't a case of the need moving away. Now, the letter expressed concern about the impact on deliverability being allocated in Cluster 14 and earlier queued projects earlier this month, as well as the potential impact on how deliverability is taken into account in future transmission plans. In summary, we do agree that the cancellation of this major project in a key area is disruptive, and we are committed to working with the stakeholders to both minimize the impact of the cancellation, which we've already started with the measures we're already moving forward with, as well as to minimize the impact of the transition from the old project to the new mitigations. So this is a complex issue given the integration of our transmission planning and resource interconnection process, but we've started that dialogue with our stakeholders, and over the next few months we do have some paths forward that we think we're optimistic we will be able to minimize the impacts of the transition as well as the overall impact of the cancellation itself. Let's see. Next, I should say a few words about the letter we received from GridLab. This letter really is proposing a different study approach be adopted by the ISO, and in particular that it be investigated as a potential new study process for the LA Basin. Now, regarding the study process that's being described itself, I do need to go back to just reiterate some points Jeff made. Our current planning process, when we refer to reliability, policy, and economically driven projects, we're always needing to or wanting to reinforce with people that those are not siloed processes, that they're sequenced, where our reliability needs are identified, potential mitigations, policy needs identified that may result in new projects or a modification to a solution that would simply meet the reliability needs. And that also applies to economically driven projects. Those could also be enhancements or modifications to previously approved projects. So we also already have what we would consider a sequenced approach that's consistently applied to assess needs and land on solutions. Now, I do believe that the key components of what's being proposed by GridLab already are incorporated in our current study processes. The sequencing terminology might be a bit different, but the end effect is the same. And production cost modeling and the cost of congestion is already taken into account in those studies. So we're interested in continuing to work on our study process, but we don't see transitioning to a completely different study sequence on a case-by-case basis. And of course, we have been and will look to continue coordinating with LADWP on joint opportunities going forward. Silicon Valley Power. provided a letter raising concerns, and this one we very much took to heart and have been in conversation with people from Silicon Valley Power since. They raised the concerns about the opportunity they had to review and comment on the specific alternatives that were proposed, and several of which that they saw the actual alternative that fell out of previous discussions in the draft transmission plan being posted on April 6th, which they felt gave limited opportunity to review and comment on. Now, while the specific alternatives that developed through the process were presented for the first time in the draft plan, various alternatives and discussion around the needs had occurred up until that point. So it wasn't that the entire process came at the last minute, but the final alternatives did show up for the first time in the draft plan. Now, in contrast, we have studied the upgrades and did not identify any negative impact to Silicon Valley Power from the upgrades planned in the PG&E system. And as in a normal course of business, we would continue to work with Silicon Valley Power to address any residual affected system concerns that could be identified after approval. However, we do appreciate Silicon Valley Power's concern, and we do acknowledge the number of parallel activities that we're all facing. So this has been complicated with a number of things moving in parallel. So while we do see that the 230 kV project in the area that supports the entire area is particularly important to move forward with promptly, we do see that it would be reasonable to provide Silicon Valley Power more opportunity to examine the 115 kV projects that they identified that more directly impact their facilities before we ask you for approval to move forward. So in response to their letter, what we are proposing here is that to maintain that good working relationship and collaboration with Silicon Valley Power, that we do place item G of the South Bay Reinforcement Project and the De Anza 115 kV substation project on hold. We would note this inside the final draft transmission plan, subject to your approval. And this would require us to revisit those projects later in the year with you, either asking for your approval to proceed or for your approval to any amendments resulting from additional collaboration with Silicon Valley Power. And by doing so and acknowledging that today, that would enable you to make a decision on that later in the year as a separate decision item. Now, so we can talk more about that after, but I'll just finish walking through the comments. The last letter that I was going to touch on is the letter we received from the California Wind Association. And that letter in particular raised a number of concerns around our treatment of land-based in-state wind resources and suggesting that we should be providing them the same consideration for reserving deliverability capacity in our transmission planning process that we apply to certain other very select resource types. Now, I do want to mention up front, we do not agree with the request that CalWi is making. And by way of a bit of background, we do reserve transmission capacity only when it's considered absolutely necessary to achieve long-term policy objectives, considering both the unique circumstances of the resource type, as well as the transmission needed to enable those resources. We do not believe that has been the case for land-based in-state wind, which has been also actively participating in our interconnection process with different levels of success for different projects. I should note that when we developed the process for reserving transmission capacity and releasing it sparingly through the interconnection process, that there was actually strong industry pushback to even enabling that due to concerns that it would expand unnecessarily and interfere with otherwise open competition. We do believe we've been consistent in how we've communicated and applied this, and consider this as the right way to move, with this being a high bar to necessitating reserving capacity for a particular resource type in a particular area. We do acknowledge that we had some initial growing pains as this was implemented, and we did have to work with the Public Utilities Commission to coordinate and ensure alignment on how this is applied and where this has been applied. So with that, that wraps up my responses to the letters. We would be happy to hear your questions as well as address any comments that come in as well. Thank you, and thank you for the time hearing us out.
Thank you, Neil and Jeff. Let me ask my fellow board members if they have any questions of Neil or Jeff. Severin, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I will repeat. Thanks, Neil. That was great. Can you say a bit about, so there is a lot of talk in Sacramento about grid enhancing technologies, and including some who seem frustrated that the CAISO area is not using grid enhancing technologies, or at least that has been the suggestion. Can you say a bit about how they are evaluated and how they play into the transmission plan?
I'd be happy to, and I'll also ask Jeff then to augment with any other examples. But for a number of years now, we've considered, especially out of the grid enhancing technology basket, we've been particularly focused on opportunities for advanced conductors and for flow control devices. They are considered a standard tool in the toolbox available to the planners. They also come with their particular costs and operating characteristics. So especially reconductoring with advanced conductors is something that's always top of mind. In this year's transmission plan, we have 12 projects that involve reconductoring as opposed to looking at new transmission construction. 3 of those projects specifically call for the use of advanced conductors to provide the most capability. 2 others also, there's the possibility in the detailed engineering and conductor selection by the transmission owner. They may also be able to build the rationale to moving to advanced conductors through the detailed engineering and move 2 more onto that list. But in this year's plan, the biggest use of grid enhancing technologies was in the advanced conductors. Flow control devices are also a very important consideration. And just by way of example, I believe LS Power is doing the groundbreaking tomorrow on a project in the Greater Bay Area, in the San Jose area, that is actually where flow control using HVDC technology was a critical component of providing the necessary flow control to avoid having to rebuild a great deal of transmission in the area by providing flow control through a key choke point. So these are particularly important to us. Dynamic thermal line ratings are an opportunity for us to pursue for economic opportunity to reduce congestion, but we don't see the same opportunity there for helping with our peak loads, which normally come during extremely hot, dry conditions and often with very little wind flow to reduce conductor temperature. So dynamic thermal line ratings have played less of a role in opportunity for reliability or policy-driven transmission. Each year in the transmission plan, we actually summarize the use of the grid enhancing technologies as well. Jeff, I should turn to you and ask if there were any other examples you wanted to point to.
No, I think that covers the examples, and it is one thing when we're doing the alternative analysis, and it is documented in the alternative analysis for the recommended projects as well as through it in Appendix B as we're looking. So we do consider the grid enhancing technology as alternatives and give serious consideration as we look at them for what is needed to meet the reliability or even the policy or even the economic, and because we have identified in terms of flow controls an economic project as well previously. And as Neil indicated, the dynamic line rating is one that we're working and will be continuing to work that will require some modifications to the production cost tools. to be able to expand, to look at areas where from an economic congestion, so where that congestion is not occurring, say at the peak time or the hottest time, but where you may get some benefits of the varying reduction, and looking at it from the economic and the congestion component. And we'll be continuing looking that into next year's cycle as we go forward as well, and trying to incorporate that in a consistent method, as well as evolving the tools to be able to accommodate that as well.
And then I should also, thanks, Jeff. I should also mention, though, the advanced conductors also come with a higher price. They are a more complex conductor design. So from the ratepayer perspective, we also need to have a viable business case that the incremental cost and it is worth it. From all of our focus is from a ratepayer perspective. What's providing the best, most cost-effective in the long-term solution?
Okay, and I see a bunch of other hands up, but can I ask just one completely separate question? So we're talking about $6.9 billion for the 38 projects, $6.7 billion for the 38 projects. How should I think about the annual cost of this when I imagine there is a FERC designated rate of return, and then there are cost of capital, and then there is just essentially the capital payoff.
Mm-hmm.
How does that end up in terms of revenue requirement that I presume goes 100% into the TAC?
Yes, the 38 projects, the bulk of the costs would be above 200 kV, which go into the regional high voltage TAC. Costs that are below 200 kV show up in each utility's individual local transmission access charge. We do an estimate each year in chapter that's set out in Chapter 8, showing the expected impact of the capital that's being approved here, as well as the capital impact of all previously approved projects that have not already been added to rate base. The costs are recovered on an annualized basis from customers, looking at depreciation, tax, debt cost, return on equity, and operating costs. And of course, that winds down over time as the assets depreciate. But a very rough rule of thumb is that somewhere between 12 and 15% of the capital cost is a reasonable estimate for its annual impact. And that is recovered ultimately through customers. And that's why we have to be so focused on the ensuring we're picking the right projects, because we are aware of the cost impact this has on consumers.
Do you have an estimate of what the cost per kilowatt hour in increasing the TAC will be from this investment?
Jeff, I thought we worked out that it was under 5. Was it under 5 cents a kilowatt hour?
It's
double check.
It's 0.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
0.5 cents, 5 mils. Thanks. 0.5.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at 6.7, 15%, and then divide by our annual load, I came up with somewhere between 0.4 and 0.5.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so
sorry, I got chucked up on mils and dollars.
So you got to get back in the queue, Severn. I saw Mary
I'm done.
and Alice's hands up. I don't know who came first. Why don't you go first, Alice?
Well, I just have a quick follow-up on that last one, and then Mary can go. But just that number, the per kilowatt, how does that compare to previous plans and the cost of previous plans? So are we getting more cost effective or less cost effective over time?
Well, I would say that the solutions, if we look back 5 or 10 years, there was a period where advanced conductors were not really an option on the table. They were still very much in the early stages. There were concerns about technical concerns about their adoption. So we do have new options opened up today that were not available in the past. In terms of the total picture, though, I would go back to the fact that taking into account both the Trout Canyon Lugo project that we are asking for approval, as well as the identified need for the Path 15 and Path 26 upgrades. Those really basically complete or result in transmission upgrades to all of the corridors originally identified in the first 20-year outlook. So we did see that from a high voltage grid perspective, there would be a wave of major reinforcement called for that we're making great strides towards. But yes, we have approved now over the last previous 4 transmission plans, I believe it was 22 billion total. And unfortunately, though, when in our rate design work, people see the cost of the transmission, but they don't see the cost benefit of what it's providing in accessing lower cost resources or economic projects, bringing down the cost of congestion.
Mm-hmm.
But in round numbers, Neil, you know, if this year's plan's about 7 billion and we've spent 21 previously, so maybe 1.50 cents per kilowatt hour over the past 4 years.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers pulled together right now.
In that ballpark, though, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the other thing we are having to look at, though, is what we can do to keep that cost as low as possible. And we do have to consider, as I said, though, the competing cost impacts of being able to access the lower cost resources, which doesn't show up as an offset.
So I also come back to you. She had another question, but let's go to Mary.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about load growth, and I know we don't do the forecast, Neil, but I'm wondering, you know, on this 15 gigawatt addition by 2035, you know, we're attributing 2,000 megawatts to data centers. What,
Mhm.
you know, offhand, what the electrification numbers are, or what percent of that growth is electrification?
Oh, of transportation or building? Jeff,
Yeah,
Jeff, I don't know if you have an estimate of that off the top of your head.
Yeah, I don't have an estimate of that. I believe kind of the data centers is say approximately a third of it. The others, like you said, is there's two other main components. One is the electrification or fuel switching kind of component of the loads, and then electric vehicle. I don't have a breakdown of how much makes up each, but that is something we could in future come back with.
And what is fuel switching?
Fuel switching is as you look at in terms of switching in other industries to electric. So from one fuel type to another effectively. And some of that being a building heat, some of it being other components in there, but it's really fuel switching and from an overall electrification or greenhouse gas goals, kind of removing emissions from one and electrifying them, which is then predominantly coming from renewable resources to supply.
So you're basically saying we need additional energy to switch to more renewable energy. Greenhouse reduction.
Yeah, well, to reduce greenhouse gas in as an overall aspect is it may not all be from, say, renewable and reducing renewable resources for the loads that we have. It's also switching loads that using fossil fuel as the source for it, making it electric, in which case then we're expanding the electric renewables to supply that and overall offset the greenhouse gas goals or greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks.
All right. Well, back to you also then, Jen. You're definitely going to get your time.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Just a couple questions. The Trout Canyon project, we heard that was the one that is eligible for competitive solicitation. Can you just clarify for everyone what makes it eligible compared to the others?
Sure, it's Neil here. I can answer that. It's really anything that's over 200 kV and is essentially a greenfield project. Facilities under 200 kV are automatically assigned to the local incumbent utility, and any modifications to existing facilities also stay with the owner of those facilities. So new transmission lines, entirely new substations. We've also put out for competitive solicitation standalone STATCOM and synchronous condenser devices, or SVCs, that could basically be built outside of an existing sub and terminated at the sub. So to the extent they can be, we've been more aggressive in moving forward with competitive solicitation.
Okay, so only one that's above 200 kV and greenfield. The others are
Yes.
upgrades and smaller projects. Okay, various other things.
Yes.
All
And
right.
that actually brings up the other interesting part is that in some jurisdictions, the metric of whether or not you've been reinforcing your system, people look at how many miles of new line you've approved, whereas we've been trying to avoid building new line by taking advantage of upgrade or rebuild opportunities as much as possible to keep the costs down, keep environmental impact down. But it doesn't give you as telling a number about new construction. The other thing we'd noticed was over the last 4 plans, the competitive process was the projects that were eligible represented around 10% of the projects, but represented about 50% of the capital cost estimate. So while it's not a large number of projects, they tend to be higher capital cost projects where the benefits of the competitive process would have the most impact.
That makes sense, and that's really helpful. All right, and then the second question is on the regional coordination. And you described the 2-year cycle and that no projects were brought forward in year 1. Is there anything to say about what you expect in the future on that, on the interregional coordination aspect, just as we look ahead, what might happen in the next 2 years?
Sure, thanks. We've been pretty, I'll say, pretty blunt externally about the interregional coordination process. The FERC Order 1000 tariff process has been very effective at helping share information, but it also was not very effective at helping actually move any transmission projects forward. So where we have been successful on moving interregional projects forward was through other vehicles, like negotiations with other parties and come under the FERC policy statement of 2021 that allowed negotiated arrangements, as well as proposals like the subscriber participating transmission owner model that helps SunZia and is helping Transwest Express as ways to move forward. The FERC Order 1000 interregional process only required consideration by our neighbors of an interregional project if they had already identified a regional need within a WestConnect-wide or Northern Grid-wide process. And to this point, neither planning region outside of the ISO has identified the need for a regional process, which meant by default there would be no interregional projects moved through that process. Unfortunately, we saw that as a consequence of the cost allocation provisions that were in the FERC Order 1000 process as not being something people were willing to engage on. So we've had to use other vehicles outside of that process.
Okay, great, thanks. And then on Silicon Valley Power, I really appreciate your coordination with Silicon Valley Power and the continued work with them. And your engagement with all of the stakeholders in this process. It's really, really important to do that. But with them in particular, I understand the change that's being proposed. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the reasoning, because of course you're striking a balance here.
Yes.
In terms of certainty and speed for the developers, which we know we can impact costs, but you're recommending that to hold De Anza, if I heard you correctly, the 115 kV. Could you talk a little bit more about the criteria for doing that so that it's really clear as to why we would go forward with part, but then make a decision to hold the other. And again, I do really appreciate it. I'm sympathetic to the concerns of Silicon Valley Power, but I also want to make sure we're being clear that, that we're establishing quite a bit of certainty as we go through our process, and these last minute changes can be disruptive.
Yes, and part of it is that we do recognize that we are moving on a lot of transmission very quickly, and for many of our stakeholders, it can be a burden to, I'll say, stay engaged and manage all of the work we're taking on. And we're trying to be as sympathetic as we can with that and address their particular needs. The 230 kV project that was identified as a potential impact, we do see that as being a much bigger, supporting the area as a whole. So the overall transmission system in the area needs that support, and it's also on a more pressing timeline. So that's the one project we're saying we do believe we need to press forward with. The 115 kV projects, and I was working with Jeff and I and the team had been looking at this, literally over the last few days to respond to the letter. We do see that the timeline isn't as pressing, that we can take a few extra months, not years, but months, take some extra time, make sure that SVP have the comfort they need, given that some of their facilities are immediately adjacent to these changes, and that we want to give them that, we think it's reasonable to give them that extra time.
Got it. So there's a very close connection there.
Yes, these modifications are much more directly adjacent to their network. Some of the lines that we'd be re-terminating, the other end actually is in the Silicon Valley Power system. Mm-hmm. So we think it's appropriate to give them the extra time. And as I said, want to maintain a good working relationship we have. And especially if the schedule can absorb it, let's do so.
Okay. I understand, and I'm supportive of that as well. Final point on the letter that we received from AWEA. I am certainly sympathetic to this stakeholder as well in terms of the challenges in bringing projects to completion and moving forward on onshore wind projects, which is a very valuable resource for us for our clean energy aspirations and goals. But I also understand the reasoning and the conclusion that is proposed here. I just wanted to confirm, my understanding is that what we're doing here is consistent with the CPUC's latest decision, so that we're not doing anything inconsistent with what the CPUC has concluded. Is that correct?
Yes, it's consistent with the latest decision. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, we did initially have one issue to resolve around this, where perhaps the door was being opened a bit more than what our process and tariff anticipated and allowed. And that was addressed in the latest decision.
Okay, great. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, Jan, do you still have questions?
No, Alice asked the question I had about Silicon Valley Power, Santa Clara, so thanks.
One of the things about my waiting to the end is everybody gets asked the questions for me, and they usually ask them in a more eloquent way. So I don't have additional questions. Neil and Jeff, thank you very much for that very thorough discussion of those public comment letters and your explication of some of these deeper issues that our builders have asked about. I think if there are no more questions from the board, we can go to Silas and see if there is public comment on the phone.
If you'd like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom, or if you are dialed into the phone line, you can press #2. So far, we have 3 hands up in our comment queue. Moving to our first hand, Nico, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself. You can please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chair Edo and governors. My name is Nico Prokos. I'm the director of Silicon Valley Power. I'll keep things very short. Brief introduction to us. We are the 3rd largest muni in California and the largest muni within the ISO footprint. And I think we are the poster child for all the conversations about data centers We currently have about 60 data centers in operation in our territory. We've been working very collaboratively with Neil and his staff, and I really want to express my appreciation for all the work that they've done over the past several years. I think some of you are aware there's several new transmission lines that are going to be built in the area, and I believe Neil mentioned that there's a groundbreaking tomorrow for the LS Power line. I will be there, so perhaps I'll see some of you, and if not, that's okay, some other time. I want to really just echo what Neil said. I was going to mimic the comments in our comment letter, but due to some conversations and the ongoing collaboration, great relationship that we have with Neil and his staff, I believe that there's an elegant solution that's been put forward, and we are supportive of that. Really what we're asking for is just more time to analyze the projects and the potential impacts on our system and also the region. And this is something that we do day in, day out with the ISO staff, recognizing that there's a lot of pressure to move forward with a lot of projects in this area because of all the demand projections. But we also are big believers in making sure that things are done right. And so we just really appreciate, that Neil and his staff kind of sharpened their pencil and worked with us and came up with this solution, and we're fully on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikos. Thank you, Neil and Jeff, again, for working with a very important stakeholder here. Next, public comment.
We have 4 more. Nancy, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself. You can please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Edo, CAISO board members, and my former colleagues at the ISO. My name is Nancy Saraceno, General Counsel for the Golden State Clean Energy Group. As Neil noted, GSCE is partnering with Westlands Water District to develop the Valley Clean Infrastructure Plan in the Central Valley. Golden State supports the board approval of the plan today. We think the plan's economic assessment identifies an important need for new transmission on the 500 kV corridor in the San Joaquin Valley. As Jeff indicated in his presentation, additional engineering analysis must be completed, and the ISO anticipates addressing the transmission solution to this identified need in the 26-27 planning cycle, and Golden State is supportive of this decision. We appreciate the work of the ISO team to carefully assess the complex dynamics informing transmission planning in the state, and the CAISO's leadership for developing critical infrastructure in California. It's not easy, and we think you do a fabulous job. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next public comment.
Next, Barbara, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself. Barbara Hale, if you're there, you'll want.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Ito and Governors. I'm Barbara Hale, Assistant General Manager for Power at the San Francisco PUC, a department of the City and County of San Francisco. The department's responsible for the load-serving entity Hetch Hetchy Power. Hetchy Power funds and manages the power aspects of the Hetch Hetchy water and power system. That system includes many miles of transmission assets, including the 115 kV lines from Warnerville substation in the Sierra foothills, which travel then across the Central Valley, over the Coast Range into Alameda County, terminating at PG&E's Newark substation near San Francisco Bay. I'm here to underscore the generational opportunity represented by the Warnerville Newark Transmission Expansion Project, or WANTEP. WANTEP represents a rare opportunity to add meaningful transmission capacity to the Greater Bay Area while leveraging the existing city-owned transmission corridor I just described. These facilities are aging. As the city evaluated next steps, we heard CAISO's consistent call to make better use of existing transmission corridors wherever possible. By rebuilding and upgrading infrastructure in this established right-of-way, WANTEP faces materially fewer permitting, siting, and right-of-way acquisition challenges than many greenfield alternatives. That translates directly into lower development risk, improved schedule certainty, and reduced exposure to cost escalation. WANTEP is enabling infrastructure that meets state policy goals. Strengthening the Warnerville-Newark corridor would expand the system's ability to interconnect and deliver renewable generation from diverse geographic areas, including resources that are otherwise constrained by limited import capability into the Greater Bay Area. From a system planning standpoint, WANTEP was conceived as a 230 kV corridor level reinforcement. It's not intended to replace downstream 115 kV upgrades, but rather to preserve long-term optionality, improve reliability across planning horizons, and allow downstream investments to be sequenced and right-sized more efficiently as needs evolve. WANTEP also presents meaningful ratepayer benefits. It can access low-cost financing and alternative ownership structures. Over time, it creates the opportunity for the city to become a participating transmission owner, aligning public ownership with CAISO operational control and leveraging the city's tax-exempt cost of capital to benefit the broader system. The city's not asking the board to reopen the draft plan. Rather, we want to emphasize our willingness to work collaboratively with CAISO staff to further evaluate WANTEP through appropriate pathways, including those contemplated under FERC's 2021 policy and established CAISO precedent. That work, we understand, can occur both within and outside the transmission planning process cycle. In closing, the city views WANTEP as a generational collaborative opportunity, one that can be shaped jointly to advance reliability, policy, and cost objectives of the CAISO managed grid while managing risks for ratepayers. Thank you to Mr. Mueller and his team for collaboration to date, for recognizing the value of this right-of-way. Governors, I ask for your support of continued staff engagement to further evaluate WANTEP's merits and potential pathways forward. Let's ensure our WANTEP transmission corridor asset management has future needs of the CAISO managed grid in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for offering to continue to work with our staff. I know that Neil is eager to continue this discussion, so very pleased to see this going forward. Another comment?
Moving to the next hand, Nancy Rader, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Chairman Edo, Vice Chair Leslie, and board members. This is Nancy Rader, Executive Director of the California Wind Energy Association. I do hope you had an opportunity to review the letter in your packet addressing our concerns that CAISO staff decided not to classify in-state wind as a long lead time resource, which makes it ineligible for transmission deliverability reservations in the transmission plan before you. As with out-of-state wind and in-state geothermal resources, development of in-state wind depends on reserve transmission deliverability because solar and battery projects can be developed significantly faster and in vastly more locations. Therefore, transmission that is planned for in-state wind will almost certainly be quickly claimed by solar or battery resources, virtually precluding in-state wind development. Suffice it to say that staff's decision is wholly inconsistent with its own stated policy regarding the resources that qualify a resource as being long lead time. Though comments made earlier in this meeting imply that private discussions about the additional considerations occurred with the PUC, staff provided no public explanation for its decision and did not respond to CalWIA's comments. Both the PUC and CAISO staff need to understand that if not corrected, this decision will prevent the development of in-state wind resources, including resources in the PUC's latest portfolio in northeastern California, just across the border from out-of-state resources in Nevada. This incongruent treatment will prevent the development of the out-of-state wind resources in the PUC's portfolio and will strongly favor out-of-state wind resources. I urge you to ask management at a minimum to revisit and clarify this opaque policy with stakeholder input in advance of next year's plan. Thank you very much.
Neil, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, it's Neil. Whoops, I'm hearing some bad echo now. Am I coming through clearly? Okay, so sorry. Yes, so short, just to address some of those comments directly. We do believe that our process we've been clear in the articulation, both in our transmission plan and in other forums, about what was meant to be achieved and the kind of projects that we saw qualifying. When it comes to the particular wind resources that Ms. Rader pointed to, my recollection of those is that the actual expectation of the CPUC was that some resources would be coming into California through a roundabout path that did not require any new transmission to be developed. But more importantly, the issue about how we were dealing with this through our consultation process, actually, I do have Danielle Mills on standby because she was leading those stakeholder processes directly. And I think it would be best to turn that part over to Danielle about how this issue was being discussed in our interconnection process stakeholder consultation effort. Danielle, would you mind jumping in on this?
Yeah, happy to, Neil. And good afternoon, everyone. I did want to just address and kind of outline the process that we've taken to get clear ourselves on this process. As Neil mentioned earlier, this process was developed in interconnection process enhancements track 3 of our previous interconnection process enhancements initiative. And I believe it was concluded and adopted by or approved by the Board of Governors last year, so in 2025. So we were sort of working through this process and implementation of it on the fly as we were processing the new portfolios from the Public Utilities Commission and also thinking about how those portfolios change over time. So last spring, I think late spring, is when we approved this new process under the Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative. Through further conversations internally and with stakeholders, we did look at our tariff language and the original intent under Interconnection Process Enhancements Track 3, the reserve deliverability really for long lead time resources that were not commercially developable within a short time frame. We view in-state land-based wind as being commercially mature. We've seen projects materialize and develop. Not all projects are transmission development or transmission dependent rather. And so through conversations internally and public notice that we provided on November 19th at a transmission planning process stakeholder meeting, we did provide an update to stakeholders that we did not intend to reserve deliverability for in-state onshore wind or biomass resources. And this was after much deliberation, as I said, internally. And then in addition, through discussions with the Public Utilities Commission and as their portfolios developed in this latest set of portfolios that resulted in a final decision in March of 2026, the Public Utilities Commission also addressed these concerns, stating that in-state wind has not been deemed to have a long lead time by the California ISO because its development timeline is similar to other resources, and there are already numerous projects in the interconnection queue, and recognized that change from the previous portfolios and emphasized a focus on other long lead time resources that are more transmission dependent or less commercially mature. So with that, we do feel that we've tried to be transparent with stakeholders. I do appreciate that this has been a new process and one that we've had to sort of work to implement in a clearer way. But as Neil said, we did want to make sure that this was an option and a pathway that was only used in limited circumstances to ensure that we're, encouraging competition throughout the market.
Thank you, Daniel. Severin, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on something else Nancy Rader said, which was a comparison to out-of-state wind, that it was getting preferential treatment in long lead time. Or at least maybe I misheard that, but I wanted to understand what that suggestion was.
Well, it's Neil here. It is true that out-of-state wind projects, the out-of-state wind resources, are being held up for this transmission reservation. And one of the key facts of life here is that the key import paths when projects bring out these large out-of-state resources to our border, The network that is used to bring the power from our border to our load centers tend to also be attractive for other shorter lead time projects to connect along the way. So this was one of the original concerns that actually led to the development of this policy, was both for the offshore wind, such as in Diablo Canyon, as well as out-of-state wind, that once it reaches the contact point with the California system, those transmission paths or corridors could easily be used up by projects applying into our interconnection process, getting allocations, and then holding that capacity for several years as they try to advance their project, and actually become a barrier that we would constantly be trying to move on new upgrades for the sake of accessing that out-of-state resource, but then having that capacity allocated to in-state resources that could apply and move forward more quickly. And that would actually turn out to be a barrier to ever accessing those larger blocks of out-of-state resources. So we're not just saying that wind is long lead time, yes or no. Here's where the type of projects that are being developed, very large projects out of state and needing major transmission both to get to our border as well as capacity from our border to our load centers in order to be viable. So
can I ask, so if there's a equal size wind project just on the California side of the border and just on the other side of the border, they would get substantially different treatment?
If there was a large basket of resource development that had these same challenges, we would look to consider them equally. But it's a combination of the resource and the transmission needed to get those resources to load. And do we have a problem that would stand in the way of that resource being developed? And I think, for example, here, the one in-state resource that is being identified as potentially needing that type of consideration is long-duration energy storage. So in our transmission plan, Jeff and his team did identify the resources where we are retaining deliverability, reserving deliverability this year, and that includes several key long-duration energy storage sites. So if there was a case that the wind resource was falling into that same category of also having that very lengthy development time, we would look at it, but we haven't had that kind of case put forward. And I do hesitate to try to get too prescriptive about what hypotheticals would look like, because the details definitely matter.
No, and I respect that. I'm just trying to understand if there is a policy that on one side of the border it gets treated one way and on the other side of the border it gets treated a different way.
We don't have a similarly situated type of project as, say, a SunZia sitting inside our border. So that's where I don't have so the policy doesn't call out in-state versus out of state. It's the details matter here.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments here from the board? All right. I understand, Silas, there was one more in the queue for public comment.
Yep, we have one more. Jim, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Edo and the Board of Governors. My name is Jim Gill. I'm the Senior Director of Long-Term Energy System Planning at Pacific Gas and Electric. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the draft transmission plan. I'd like to start by stating, we applaud the diligent work of the California ISO staff and the work they've done in completing the transmission plan this year. Particularly, I want to thank the California ISO Transmission Planning Group for their consideration and inclusion of the needed reliability solutions in PG&E service territory that's going to allow us to continue to safely and reliably serve our customers. Specifically, I want to highlight CAISO's leadership in identifying the set of reliability projects in the Greater Bay Area that is going to significantly increase and strengthen the load serving capabilities in that area and ensure that load serving entities can meet and serve our customers timely. We are concerned about delaying or slowing down any portion of the transmission plan, as this will affect our ability to serve customers and help meet their expected in-service dates. PG&E has reviewed the South Bay Transmission Plan projects that are being proposed to be put on hold, and we did not find any impact to Silicon Valley Power. And in addition, these identified projects, we believe, are the best alternatives to meet future customer needs in the South Bay. Now, while Silicon Valley Power may need additional time to review, PG&E believes that this can happen in parallel while the transmission plans move forward. So with that, PG&E would strongly encourage that the board adopt the transmission plan, and we look forward to continuing to work with the California ISO staff to identify future transmission needs. Thank you for your time.
Neil, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, well, first, I really appreciate the comments overall. And when it comes to the particular projects and the concern Silicon Valley Power raised, I do think we're relatively on the same track there, with the 230 kV development in the area being the most pressing. We did believe that we can spare a few months on the 115 kV projects, but to be clear, we'll be coming back to the board this year. We would not be waiting for next year's transmission plan. So we want to give Silicon Valley Power that extra opportunity, but would not be looking at an extensive delay on this.
Thank you, Neil. Are there any more comments from board members before we go for a motion? All right, Corporate Secretary.
I think
Thank you.
there are other comments.
sorry?
Silas, is there another hand in the queue?
We did have Nancy Rader put her hand back up,
Oh.
probably for a follow-up.
Okay,
Nancy, you
sorry.
can set the prompt to unmute.
Sorry.
Well, I greatly appreciate you letting me say one last thing, which is that, in fact, I think that in-state and out-of-state resources are being treated differently because there is a large wind resource in the PUC's plan for this year that is in northeastern California, right next to the border, that under the policy adopted today will not get deliverability. And what I would like to see you do is ask staff to revisit and clarify its policy, because as I read the decision, there's a categorical decision saying that in-state wind will not qualify. Thank you.
I guess, Neil, the question is, do you feel the policy is adequately clear here, or if there's need for further sharpening?
It's Neil here. I think my view is that the policy is clear, but there will be the application of the policy on a case-by-case basis will always need consideration. But this is clearly meant to like, I think I've said enough about that. But the bottom line is, I do believe it's clear. We are always happy to take a look to see if there's additional refinements, but then it's a case of the particular application.
Okay, thank you. Silas, just to make sure I don't get in trouble again, is there any other comments in the public comment queue?
There are no more hands up in the queue.
Okay. All right. Corporate Secretary.
All right, thanks, Gerardo. I have a proposed motion to read. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the ISO 2025-2026 transmission plan attached to the memorandum dated May 12, 2026. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and a second.
Second.
Somebody.
Severin.
Okay, Bordenstein, second. Got it. Thank you. And now we take a vote. Chair Edo.
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Aye.
Governor Bordenstein.
Aye.
Governor Reynolds.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Chair Edo.
All righty. Thank you, everyone. That was a very good discussion. All right, now, this is a topic I look forward to very eagerly at this time of year. We're going to get a briefing on the 2026 Summer Loads and Resource Assessment. And
Yeah.
Neil, are you going to do the introduction again?
I'll
Okay,
do the
great.
introduction. Yes, so today I'll be asking Aditya Jayaprabhakar, our Director of Resource Assessment and Planning, to provide a briefing on the ISO's 2026 Summer Assessment. The assessment work that Aditya will provide here demonstrates the continued progress we're making on seeing new resources added to the grid and continuing the trend of aligning the principles and methodologies in our summer assessment with those of other resource planning processes looking longer term. So with that, I'll thank Aditya for his work and ask him to walk you through the briefing.
Thank you, Neil. Hope I'm coming loud and clear.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil, Chair and board members. I'm happy to present to you our summer loads and resources assessment that staff from various departments worked on. As highlighted by Neil, California's grid continues to show meaningful progress in reliability, driven by the steady addition of new resources and improved planning practices. Over the past year, thousands of megawatts of new capacity, particularly clean energy and storage, have come online and are expected shortly, resulting in strengthened reserve margins that exceed forecasted demand and industry reliability targets that I will show you over the coming slides. On a very, very high level, we should look at it from a resource addition standpoint. Over the since last September, we've added over 2,000 megawatts of new capacity to the system that has already received COD, and an additional 6,000 megawatts of capacity is coming online, is expected to come online through June 30th of this year before the peak summer starts. From a load forecast standpoint, the California Energy Commission's Integrated Energy Policy Report, IPO forecast, shows our load, forecasts our load to be at 46,844 megawatts in hour ending 18 in September. From a weather outlook standpoint, abnormally dry conditions are expected throughout the West. Increased chances of above normal temperatures are expected June through August. It looks like it's going to be a hot summer again. Next slide, please. To conduct a probabilistic assessment, what we do is we take stock of all the existing resources, planned resource additions, and conduct a probabilistic assessment against a wide range of system conditions. You look at it from a varied wind samples, load samples, solar production profiles, forced outage rates and planned outage rates of the system, operating reserves requirements as it changes through each sample that we assess, conduct a detailed production cost simulation that assesses hourly chronologically as if those were the conditions, what would the system conditions look like, by taking into all the existing resources inside the system and all RA eligible resources inside the system and import considerations. Then we measure the performance of the system across all these simulations against a reliability target, a loss of load expectation of 0.1, which is an agreed upon industry standard that has been used in the system for a long time. And using that, we determine if the system shows a surplus of capacity or a shortfall of capacity against that particular target. For this modeling, we use Plexus, which is our analytical engine. Next slide, please. The probabilistic assessment, when you look at all of the existing resources, the heat map here shows the risk hours observed from all of those simulations. So as expected, August and September during our 19-20 hours is when the risk is expected, and that is what is out of the base portfolio. And what we are assessing here is the probability of the system getting into emergency system conditions, and not actually loss of load is not measured, even though we call it loss of load here. The intent here is to measure the probability of getting into emergency measures. And then to get to a 0.1 loss of load expectation target, we start removing certain capacity, and the amount of capacity that is removed that gets us to a 0.1 loss of load expectation is the surplus. And that comes out to be around 2,500 megawatts of surplus capacity. Next slide, please. So we take all of those resources and also apply some dispatch assumptions and conduct what is called as a multi-hour stack analysis. to visually represent if these resources were dispatched against the load forecast, what would the surplus look like? This representation concludes that the system has a lot of capacity, and also back of the envelope calculation is performed to determine what is the hourly margin from the portfolio that meets a 0.1 LOLE, and that is at 25%, 25% above the IPO forecast. The system actually achieves about 30.8%, which is much more than what is actually shown to the ISO in the monthly RA program. And the ISO shown capacity translates to around 17.5% planning reserve margin. That's a good story there. Next slide, please. This is zooming in to the net peak hours in September and looking at the excess calculated against the capacity in the system and against the load forecast and what is in excess of the what is shown to the ISO. The orange line is what is demonstrating the resources against what would be shown to the ISO, about which the system has 5,700 megawatts of total capacity, against what meets a planning reserve loss of load expectation of 0.1 LOLE. 2,500 megawatts is the average surplus capacity observed during those net peak hours. As I mentioned earlier, this is assessing our probability of getting into emergency system conditions. So therefore, in the emergency conditions, you have access to an additional 3,379 megawatts of resources. That includes the OTC resources and emergency assistance on the interties. And then you also have additional programs that the CPUC and CEC and others operate, which gives more access to resources. So it looks like the system has a good surplus of resources. This is a very high-level view of the weather forecast. It shows an increased chance of above normal temperatures across the interior California, as can be seen on the map on the right. The forecast, we break it into two pieces. June through August, expect strong warm anomalies favored across the northern and central U.S., central western U.S. basically, and above normal coastal sea surface temperatures increase the likelihood of a warmer coastal summer. And the warmer coastal summer has an impact on our load forecast directly because most of our load is along the coasts. And then late fall, the forecasts continue to show above normal temperature potential. This is measuring the potential of above normal temperatures, and that also shows an increased chance of above normal throughout the West. Next slide, please. And in conclusion, these results reflect not only sufficient resources to meet a wide range of expected system conditions, but also continued momentum in enhancing system resilience as we manage a rapidly evolving resource mix. While challenges remain, particularly around extreme weather and regional risks, the overall outlook underscores that the coordinated effort across agencies, markets, and infrastructure investments are delivering a more reliable grid for California. And abnormally dry conditions, wildfires, and the potential for widespread heat events continue to pose risks to the grid. But from a resource standpoint, it looks like a pretty solid surplus capacity. And like Chair Mitchell says, we don't want to count until October to look back and see how the summer went, but it looks like a pretty cautiously optimistic outlook going into the summer. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Aditya. That was very reassuring compared to the situation that I know that we were in a few years ago. So that's terrific. I now know that if I don't ask the question first, someone else is going to ask these questions. I won't get my chance. And I see someone put his hand up, so I'm going to take my on slide 31,
You
where you're
go,
showing the
Joe.
resource stack. One of the questions I had, and I'm very pleased to see that looking at the forecast during the stress hours 18, 19, 20, that even without imports, there's plenty of battery storage there to meet the capacity requirement. My question is like, what assumptions do you make about how imports are available? In particular, what conditions outside of California do, I know the conditions you assume within California. How do you assume, what do you think about in terms of what the weather is like outside of California and how that affects the availability of those imports?
Yes. I can go from the modeling standpoint, and Neil, feel free to jump in to add additional context. The imports as shown here are for the hours, except the net peak hours, it is capped at the MIC, which is the maximum import capability of 11,000 change. For the net peak hours, we cap it at 6,500 megawatts. That is to include three things. One which is new this year is the SunZia resource contribution towards the availability during the net peak hours. That increases about 1,000 megawatts. 1,500 megawatts come from known resources like Palo Verde, Hoover, and then 4,000 megawatts is non-resource specific RA imports into the system. The reason this classification is important is this assumption is informed by what we have historically observed in the system being contracted and shown to the ISO from the rest of the non-CAISO WEC region as imports into the system. So that is the import assumption.
And it's Neil here. I would just add, just stepping back a bit from that, is if I was going to summarize the objective, we know it's not feasible in our own summer assessment work to try to study all the conditions happening out of state. So really what the team do is look at a relatively conservative assumption about how much import based on historical trends should be available and capping the input at that level. So we need to take into account imports given the historical track record, but we also don't want to be overly, and we don't want to be overly dependent, and also not have the transparency around the amount we are dependent on those resources, which is why we go to a conservative assumption, but then just cap the imports over those critical hours.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks, Aditya. I think Severin, you were next, and then we'll go to Mary after that.
Thanks. I had two very different questions. One is about batteries, and these are questions that keep coming up when I talk to people about summer, particularly late summer and end of the day. Is the duct getting leaner at this point from having so much battery capacity on that we're not seeing the huge drop in net load because we're charging those batteries, and we're not seeing the top of the head nearly be as high because we can discharge them? Are batteries outrunning solar?
This is Mark Rothater.
Yeah.
I think
good.
we're
You are around.
Yeah. I am around. Yes. I think it is correct to say that the batteries are flattening out the duct effect, basically bringing the belly up during the middle of the day, and if you account for that discharge, bring the head of the duct down. We are endeavoring to try to show that on our daily outlook so that you can see the effect of the not just the net load minus wind and solar, but load minus wind and solar accounting for the battery output. It's a bit complicated, so we're in the middle of trying to do that. But I think it is correct to say that the flattening of the duct curve does occur with the batteries.
Okay, thank you.
And then it's Neil here. I would just chime in as well that as we look at the longer term portfolios, once you reach that right equilibrium, a lot of storage, solar was added first, then a lot of storage. As you reach the right equilibrium, you'll see both solar and storage being added. So then that profile, that optimal profile is going to probably become a bit more stable.
Yeah, no, that would be good. Although Technology keeps evolving, so we'll have to see what it throws at us next. My other question, and not to put her on the spot, but I see Amber is actually on the call. We get these updates about summer weather forecasts, and I'm just curious how much information is in them. I mean, I'm sure that the long-term forecast is higher than normal, but is it higher than normal with some certainty, or is that a really diffuse distribution has shifted slightly rightward and we shouldn't make too much of it one way or the other? My impression is that weather forecasting 3 months ahead is still pretty lousy, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Oh, Amber, good. Thank you.
I am here unless the DT wants to take it, but he says no. From a certainty standpoint, the longer out you go, you do have the great degradation in uncertainty, right? Or certainty in the forecast. I think for this summer's forecast, though, the sea surface temperatures across the coastline are well above normal. The last time we saw sea surface temperatures this high, this early in the season was in 2015. 2015 is also a sim year as it relates to where the drought conditions are across the West. And drought really plays a big role in the summer forecast setup, specifically where that big high pressure ridge is going to sit. And so with those two factors, there is certainty in the forecast that you are going to have less marine layer because of the sea surface temperatures. The minimum temperatures are going to be elevated, which end up elevating the maximum temperatures and also the load profiles. So I think there is certainty in the forecast of this one being warmer than normal. Some of the other sim years that came up as we looked at the current sea surface temperatures, the different phases of El Nino and La Nina, the drought conditions are 2018, I already mentioned 2015, 2022, 23, and 24. So I'm sure you remember some of those summers, they were all pretty warm. So I think there is certainty that we are going to have more heat than we have seen. And I think the big driver to that is the warm sea surface temperatures across the coast. So hopefully that helps.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Amber.
But those temperatures are factored into the load forecast that Aditya you reported on, the 46.8 gigawatts, right?
The 46,844 megawatts is the CEC's IPO forecast. They take into account some factors, but I don't know, depending on the timing, because it was developed last year, through the course of last year, there is a lag there. But what we do in our probabilistic distribution is this also informs the spread. Probabilistic the information distribution is informed by the hydro conditions and things like that. That's what are all factored into the analysis, not so much into the forecast.
Okay. All right. Mary?
Okay, so my question was on the weather also, because I understand the buffer we've created in our own system, particularly with batteries. And also, Neil, what you're saying about how we only really focus on California. But I appreciate what Amber's saying, that these different weather occurrences in 2015, 18, 23, 24. And I guess what my concern is the Western state analysis of what a heat event is in the West. Do we have any projections about what a heat event looks like in the West, combined with the fact that we're going to have this abnormal conditions offshore with no cooling? Are we modeling any of that? Because that feels new.
sorry, it's Neil here. I'll start with that, but I might ask actually if Mark wants to engage on that topic as well, because as I said, we start off on the probabilistic analysis that Ditya walked you through, looking at trying to look at a conservative assumption, but we're not modeling an actual, a specific west-wide heat wave event. It's probabilistic approach, also assuming conservative that resources might be constrained outside. But then the other tool in the toolbox is to look deterministically at more of an extreme event that might have low probability but high consequences. And that's where we turn to not only the amount of surplus we have, but also what emergency measures we have teed up, the state strategic reserves in particular, to help jump in on that. In terms of west-wide or nationwide analysis, both NERC and WEC do analysis of people's footprints. But Mark, I don't know if there's anything from a west-wide perspective you wanted to point to in particular.
No, I think you covered it. Maybe the only addition is that the west-wide modeling is effectively incorporated into our expectations about imports, and I think the level of imports that we are expecting are tied to the amount of resource adequacy that we've seen historically and expect this year in terms of import capability, and it tracks fairly well in terms of what we see as coming back in to the system during those net peak hours. But there's no doubt that a west-wide event will put pressure on the ability for the rest of the West to be able to support those expected import capabilities. And that's why the more extreme event that Aditya and Neil have described may fall outside of the modeled distributions, distributions that were modeled. And that's why we caveat that such as an extreme event may force us to go beyond and go into strategic reserves. So that's the tie into that comment.
And then
Mark,
I was also, it's Neil. I was just going to point to Elliot about the summer preparedness activities. Elliot, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Yeah, so Mary, I would just mention also, I think in general, a couple of weeks ago, we held our annual leadership roundtable where we pulled together all the other balancing authorities across the West and sort of did a gut check on the load resource balance in the different areas. And I think in general, there is a sense that the weather pattern, the heating pattern, the sea surface temperatures does increase some likelihood of coincident heat relative to the last couple of summers. So I think folks are really on alert. Also, NERC released its reliability assessment, I think earlier today or yesterday. It does show the Pacific Northwest as potentially being strained. So that's something we're watching. And we know that across a big fraction of the Western United States this year, there is very, very low snowpack. So there's going to be significant pressure on reservoirs going across the summer, including in California potentially. So the coordination, the assurance that the transmission system is in as good a shape as possible. Obviously, the Western Energy Imbalance Market, now EDM, giving us a little bit more visibility into the Intermountain West. Those will be tools, but we've begun, I think just even earlier today, rehearsing the summer playbook, the tabletop exercises, and just making sure that, particularly here in California, for the Balancing Authority and the entities that we work with, that everybody's just as ready as possible for deployment, because the potential for a stress summer is definitely there. And I think it's a good question. I think as we get further and further into EDAM and our footprint continues to expand in the day ahead, I'm sure we'll start sharpening up some of those broader regional forecast numbers. And that'll be something we can get further into production in the months ahead.
Well, and also if you have NERC and WEC info or even NOAA for the Western states, I mean, it would be good to share your tabletop exercises, because as much fun as that Amber Alert was and calling our friends, I hope we never do that again. And and I just, it's like you just intuitively know this is not good, and also the problem is that we base so much on what has happened before. Versus what can exponentially occur, right? Because I don't know what the extreme scenarios are or the more, but are strategic reserves really going to cover it, or are we going to be back scrambling, asking people to lower their?
Yeah, I think the key thing I'd offer, and I see Alice has a question or point too. I think the key
Yeah.
thing, the core takeaway from a resource adequacy perspective for the CAISO and in partnership with the regulatory authorities is that we have prepared a significant amount of improvement in the resource adequacy condition. We're going into the summer with an installed 1 in 10 surplus against the traditional 1 in 10 LOLE metric. That is, I think, a defensible posture. And I think, a lot of investment and dollars have gone into that. At the same time, we also know, as you're pointing out very clearly, that there is tail risk, there's exposure. That's why we carry the strategic reserves. Those resources are there, and we have exquisite coordination. We will see how the summer plays out. You can't buy enough insurance for every outcome, but I can assure you that the teams will be absolutely as ready as possible for any eventuality, and we'll be able to telegraph that, I think, with reasonable advance notice to all of our, affected constituents. So I know you sort of know that, but I think it's important.
Yes, no, this is no lack of confidence that we haven't done the right thing. This is merely wanting to be overly more concerned than usual, because this looks like we are getting clues that we may have an exceptionally unusual set of circumstances that we don't have any history of knowing how to deal with necessarily. I'm just curious, the strategic reserves, what is that? How many megawatts?
The strategic reserve is comprised of the OTC units. It's comprised of some load flex programs. I think it's about 4,200 megawatts. Mark, what's the very latest number going to this summer?
Yes, that is correct. 3,000 megawatts of about OTC and another 1,000 megawatts plus of other tools in the toolbox.
And how long does it take to power up OTC?
We usually can get it on with those on within a 24-hour notice, but we start looking out 4 days in advance, to anticipate their needs.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Elliot, and thank you, Mark. Alice.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a question about how we think about the uncertainties. And I think this is really helpful to go through kind of obviously the heat uncertainty, west-wide heat wave. We all think about a transmission line going out, those kinds of uncertainties. But how much uncertainty is there on hydro in the stack according to our assumptions? So we know that it's dry throughout the West, and so I imagine that west-wide out-of-state hydro could be limited, but do we account for that when we assume the 6,500 megawatts cap on imports? And also, does the RA program insulate us from some of the uncertainty of lower levels of west-wide hydro? And then the second part of my question is, what about in-state hydro? And Elliot, you mentioned the low snowpack, but I understand that reservoirs are actually pretty full. Is there some uncertainty around what we can get from in-state given the level of the reservoirs? Or is there some uncertainty toward the end of the year? And does RA help us with that too?
Yeah, I'll just add one piece, and then Neil, why don't you can talk about the modeling assumptions for tail events. But you're exactly correct, Alice, that we're in sort of this odd situation where we actually have the reservoir levels in California are at a relatively very, very, very high levels. As a matter of fact, we can recall in March, we had this, crazy winter storm, I think 8-10 feet of snow in the Sierra, then it promptly turned into, 85-degree temperatures. We lost a lot of that snowpack. It's sitting in reservoirs. The implication is that we're going to have to really sip from those reservoirs across the summer, and we're not going to get a lot of recharge. So we're not going to get a lot of help going into the latter part of the summer as the days get shorter and it's still hot. So it's conservation and efficient utilization of water. That's the case up in the lower Columbia, south of Canada, and it's going to be the case in other parts. And of course, we know the Colorado River is under significant stress. So current reservoir levels as of today are not a great indicator of what the summer is going to look like. Because they're going to have a lot of pressure and they're not going to get a lot of help from snowmelt. In terms of how they're being modeled, I'll turn it back to the team to talk about how some of those more stress scenarios are being modeled in the resource adequacy analysis.
And yeah,
Thank you,
Neil,
Ellie.
and I just wanted to add that for the hydro modeling in a ditches analysis, that's one of the reasons I'll say wait till the last minute, because we do want to incorporate the latest hydro information. And putting it bluntly, we knew the analysis takes into account that this is a bad hydro year in state. Out of state, it's reflected by that conservative input assumption around the 5,500 this year, plus the allowance for SunZia. But that's how we try to reflect that. And yes, it's always a challenge about how to reflect very high impact but very low probability events that would not statistically move the dial very much on a production cost model. So we do break the analysis out the two different ways. A ditches probabilistic analysis is looking at the more traditional distributions of load, unit outages, known hydro conditions. And then we also look at, well, what kind of risk are we exposed to for an extreme event? Because a wildfire taking out a particular high utilization transmission corridor is very low probability. If you added a probability to that in our production cost modeling, it would never move the dial because it's such an unlikely event. But the consequences are huge. So that's where we step back and say, we know what we know probabilistically, and now what are these extreme event type conditions, and what else do we have in the toolbox to help manage it? And that's where we look at the strategic reserve, the emergency measures, and how much surplus we have for meeting a 1 in 10 target.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot and Neil.
Go ahead, Aditya.
One point that I wanted to say, we've actually looked at the historical snow conditions and found a typical similar year in the past, and we've seen 2021, 2022 hydro conditions match the level of snowpack conditions from this year, because snowpack is going to be an important variable, like Elliot mentioned, in the ability of utilizing hydro for longer hours in the later part of August and early September. So that's we modeled in the summer assessment, we modeled it based on the snowpack conditions.
Oh, that's really helpful.
As of April 1st.
That's very helpful. Other questions from the board? Seeing none, let's go to public comment. Silas, is there any public comment?
Okay, if you would like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 on the phone. So far, we've got 2 hands up in our public comment queue. Jonathan, you're sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and CAISO Board of Governors. My name is Jonathan Young, and I am the Energy Manager for the State Water Contractors. We are the 27 public agencies that get water from the State Water Project, which is run by the Department of Water Resources. And I just wanted to point out the important role that the State Water Project plays in the emergency response to grid straining events. As noted in the CAISO's emergency plans, the Department of Water Resources and Metropolitan Water District are identified as contacts to be engaged in advance of grid stressing events. All of our members stand ready to collaborate with the Department of Water Resources in this capacity, as demonstrated during 2022 and 2023 events when the State Water Project was able to shift hundreds of megawatts of load per day over a 6-day period by flexing State Water Project delivery schedules and increasing generation. We believe there's additional opportunities to unlock further load reduction capacity through the CAISO's Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Working Group, and look forward to continuing to work with CAISO staff on this effort. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your partnership. I'm very pleased. I know I've been following the DDEM, and I'm looking forward to where they go with some of these resources. Thanks for that comment. Silas, the next one.
Yep, Ed, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Chairman Edo and members of the Board of Governors. I'm Ed Smeloff, and I'm a consultant with Grid Lab. and want to say that things do look very good this summer with a planning reserve margin when you're counting all of the RA resources of over 30%. I've been advising and assisting some of the environmental justice organizations across the state, and they are particularly concerned about the continued reliance on the OTC units along the coast, which have been available for the last 3 years and will be available for this summer. And that's, I think it's somewhere right now about 2,800 megawatts of the OTC plants. So you do this probabilistic analysis, and it's really superb analysis. You're looking at 500 synthetic weather years, probably over 4 million hours of data, and you are able to look at very extreme conditions to come up with what is the 1 in 10-year reliability. In 2002, it's understandable that the state was worried, about the ability to onboard all of the resources that you have successfully onboarded in the last 4 years, particularly batteries. So my question is, it's a statistical question. Can anybody tell me what is the probability this summer that we'll have to turn on one or more of the OTC power plants?
All right, if no one's going to take it.
Because it should be, you should statistically analyze.
Sorry, go ahead. I think, Aditya, you want to try to cover that within your analysis and what your numbers mean?
Yeah, so last year and this year, we changed our approach from how we were doing it historically. We've only looked at the RA eligible resources, which means there are additional energy-only resources in the system which are not modeled. All of these OTC resources are not modeled in the analysis. So that's why if you go back to that chart, please, the net peak. I don't have the number. If you that one, thank you, Christina. In this, the 3379 megawatts of additional emergency supply, that bar is what is intended to capture the emergency resources, and the access to the OTCs happens in that time frame, and above which there are these energy-only resources that are able to produce whatever they're producing at that time. And there are also the additional about 800-900 megawatts of additional programs that are not included in this analysis. So it's a very conservative estimate of what happens. So all of these all of the resources are assessed against the system projected conditions. Mark?
Well, yeah, I'll just say I think the probability is relatively low that we will need to call on that. It has decreased over the last few years as a result of additional resources, but I also want to say the probability is not zero. So and so there is still potential, at least for this year, extreme events that could necessitate the need to call those up. But I think the probability is decreased and is relatively low for this summer, as evidenced by Aditya's analysis.
So would you know what the probability is for 2027?
I'm not going to speculate on that.
Not be available in 2027. So the probability.
We're expecting that they will not be available, and we feel like we're on a trajectory that we will not need to rely on those in 2027, and we expect them to go away.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's Neil here. The only other thing I would add to this is that I totally agree with what Mark and Aditya said, but I would also emphasize that the resource planning from the state is focused on meeting reliability and state clean energy goals. So in general, we would expect to see the clean energy goals resulting in slightly higher procurement overall than what was needed to meet the basic 1 in 10 target. So as long as we're meeting or achieving that trajectory, we would be on the high side of meeting the 1 in 10 planning target for reliability because we have these other drivers that would also be encouraging additional resources. But that just puts the emphasis on the need to maintain the pace of development that's called for through the CPUC's resource planning to stay ahead of the curve.
Understood. That makes a lot of sense. To stay ahead of the curve on clean energy procurement.
Yes. And that would keep you above the minimum on reliability. The clean energy requirements tend to be more demanding and requiring a higher pace of development to be on a trajectory to meet the state's clean energy goals.
Mary, do you have another question?
Yeah, just stimulated thought. Hey, just remind me, do we also factor other entities like CAL FIRE and others on whoever the Western version of that is on what their projections are given the kind of weird winds and heat? Is that factored in any of our analysis as it would affect the interties?
Yeah, as Neil mentioned earlier, we don't factor in extreme events because we don't want to forecast what those will be, and they are low probability, high impact events. But I will go back to the point that Elliot made earlier, which is we coordinate with all of these leadership roundtable and we work with the WEC parties. The CAL FIRE is one of the entities that we have these roundtables with. They're all engaged in this coordinated event. I see Amber come off mute. So anything else you would like to add there, Amber?
No, I just wanted to say the same thing that you were saying, Aditya, is that CAL FIRE does work closely with us in the leadership roundtables. We do collaborate with them from a forecasting perspective on the fuels as well as the heat as it relates to fire risk. And then those collaborations move into the summertime period. But they're really a partner as we go into the summer in different outlooks.
And Amber, is there a Western regional version of CAL FIRE?
There is other organizations, so each region has an outlook from the fire weather perspective. And we do have some graphics as well that we put into presentations looking at the fire risk outlook. I will say from a near-term fire risk outlook, you see a lot of fire risk within the Northern California area, the Pacific Northwest, based on the drought conditions. We also see it in the desert Southwest. As you head into the later summer time period, you see some easing of fire risk in the desert Southwest because we are expecting an active monsoon within those Four Corner region, specifically the southern part of the Four Corners. But that is all within the different fire outlooks. CAL FIRE is part of it, but it's really a Western outlook.
No, you're right, because your own map on seasonal temperature outlook, it's the dark orange is in the areas you mentioned, which are, could affect imports to us if they have fires. Okay, so you do coordinate with CAL FIRE and you are aware of what's going on in the West. Thanks.
I will just add that operationally we do also coordinate with fire response forces, and I have to say that even this year and last year, the responsiveness and the attention to those fires and where they are located relative to the transmission assets has really been tremendous, and we just see that response improving every year over year.
Good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are there any more public comments, Silas?
Nope, at this time there are no more hands in the queue.
All right. Well then, again, Neil, Aditya, Mark and Elliot, and Amber, thank you so much for this update. It's not over till it's over. I feel better than I have in past years, but again, you can't predict the future, but you can do the best you can to prepare. So let's go on to the next agenda item, and this is future agenda items. Do my fellow governors have any other items for future agendas? All right, seeing none, I will adjourn our meeting. Thank you all for participating. Look forward to a good summer.
Thanks.
Thank you,
you.
Jeff.
Thank you.